Hello and welcome to another one of my Infinity Nikki season reviews. So I know this is a bit late. I meant to release this like 2 weeks into the 1.8 update, but that, as you can see, did not happen. Anyways, let's just hop right into this. I have a lot to talk about. So obviously, spoilers for this event. There's gonna be 3 parts to this, just like my last season review. So we're gonna go over the strengths of the writing, the weaknesses of the writing, and then we're gonna go over just overall things about the update as a whole that I either took issue with or have praise for. Let's get into it. So the strengths, I always want to start with the strengths, and I actually think there's quite a few in this season. The first thing I wanted to talk about, because there is a lot I want to talk about, but the first thing is I really liked how we got more world building. We were broadening the world of Mirrorland quite a bit. And even though DANQING Island, or, you know, the world within the painting isn't necessarily of Mirrorland. And if you played the event, you know why that is. This is something, a world that is created solely off of Nikki and her creativity and her gifts as a stylist from the previous timeline. So not our Nikki in this timeline, but the previous Nikki from the timeline that went to shit. For lack of a better term. And I'll talk about the other timeline Nikki in a second. I really liked how DANQING Island introduces this huge new culture to dig our teeth into. I like that because there's a very established culture within Wishfield, right? And how the people of this part of the world, of this part of Mirrorland, how they function and what they value and so on. And it was nice to get that same level of detail about this new culture, who I assume are inspired by the Linlong culture that we will eventually go see, since Nikki created this world based off of the landscapes and people she met and knew in her time in the Linlong dynasty in this other timeline. I also want to point out that Nikki of this timeline, okay, so not the previous Nikki, artist Nikki will say from the previous timeline, but this Nikki knew a lot about the cultures of these people already. She knew about the significance of the holidays. She knew about all of the traditions that they had. So obviously, this tells us a lot about Nikki's homeworld, that a lot of these customs echo the culture she grew up in, I have to assume, right? Because it's established at the very beginning of the quest that Nikki has no concept or knowledge about this world in the painting. And when they call her artist Nikki, the NPCs, right, at the beginning, Nikki does not have any idea what they're talking about. All she kind of knows is that I guess they're mistaking me for someone. And she kind of just slots herself into that. And I actually want to talk about this because I did think, while this is a really cool concept, and it's like a cool, like, back and forth between this Nikki and the previous one, who the previous Nikki was and what made her that way, right? What caused her to have the kind of personality that she did, what she was doing in this painting, what her intentions were, blah, blah, blah. I will get to that, but I think there is a slight weakness in the way this was presented in the narrative, but I still think at its core, it's a really cool concept because learning about this other timeline Nikki gives us more context on our, Nikki in this timeline and who she is and what she values, and kind of not that she won't make mistakes, but it's cool to see how she spots the differences between herself and her previous self in this other time. I find it interesting that the culture in the town in this painting, and I assume that's connected to the Linlong broader culture that we will eventually go see. I found it because a lot of it also echoed what we've seen of the Linlong culture so far, with the New Year's Chinese New Year event that happened, which was honestly one of my favorite events. It's top 5 so far that we have gotten, for a multitude of reasons, but I assume that they are connected because a lot of the themes and cultural traditions and things like that seem to have a lot of similarities. And Nikki already knew them, even though she'd never been in this painting before. So I have to assume that these are things that she's somewhat familiar with already, that she grew up with these ideals, these traditions, this culture, which I understand the Linlong Empire takes cultural references and is heavily inspired by China, right? And Chinese culture, which makes a lot of sense considering this game is developed by a Chinese corporation, Chinese game developers. So them using their own culture as Nikki's kind of base point makes sense. But I just wanted to point out that I think it's interesting that they essentially confirmed this, that Nikki's home world, wherever she came from, was very similar to, in terms of like culturally, was very similar to the Linlong Empire, or, you know, DANQING, the world in the painting it echoes kind of similar to what she grew up with. We have to assume through this context, right, of her knowing about all these holidays within this painting and never having been in the painting before, or at least at this point in the very beginning, to her knowledge, she's never been in this painting before. The emotional core of this story was pretty good. I felt overall it was less about two individuals, right? Like the Blue Tier season was heavily kind of focused on the story of these two women. And there is focus on Miss Bai, right? And Nikki's relationship. For the most part, I felt that the emotional soul of DANQING season was about community and the beauty of human connection and how connection saves us, right? And it's something that lasts generations. That was the theme that kept repeating in every story, right? Not just the main plot, but when we went to talk to the villagers, the NPCs that lived in the towns, and the disputes that we helped to try and settle, all of it was about lasting connection and how creating a bond with someone is something that can overcome time, right? It reaches through time, and it's something that remains. Even if you wanted to, you know, even if you want to break the bond, even if you want to ruin it or try and change it, it is stalwart and it will always be there. And I found this to be very interesting. This is, of course, the elevated theme of the event, but I like how they integrated it into the actual events of the plot and the context of this culture and this village, and within, you know, the fact that it's in a painting. Like, I felt that these elevated themes of connection and, you know, community were displayed really well in the narrative, and I was invested in it. I really liked the freshness of exploring the new kinds of landscape. It's very different from Wishfield, and the culture and the traditions of these villagers was also refreshing because it was different than the culture we see in Wishfield, obviously. So it was really fun for me to kind of sink my teeth and, like, you know, settle in my chair to listen and enjoy these new kinds of stories within a culture that is new within the game, right? Not, to Nikki, because she seems to be quite familiar with these concepts, these cultural traditions. But as a player, and a Western player or a global player, I do not have inherent knowledge of these traditions. So it was a very fun learning experience. And from what I've know of it, right, because I'm not an expert on, I couldn't say how well these cultural traditions were represented, right? I couldn't possibly know that, but from someone who doesn't know the traditions, who isn't familiar with, you know, at least the details of Chinese culture, I know very, you know, surface level things. From what was presented in the narrative, it seemed very well done, and I understood the messaging, even though I didn't know much about, you know, the culture itself, which is good. You know, the players should be able to understand and grasp the full meaning of the narrative without being having to be a part of the culture that this is being inspired from. That's good writing, right? You want that. Talking about writing, I think the characters were all pretty well written too. I think Miss Vi, of course, was given special emphasis in the story because of her bond with Nikki, and I really liked how that whole arc and how that relationship kind of plays out throughout the event narrative. I felt Miss Vi was a good way to represent the conflict in the narrative. Obviously, I picked out that she was the long dragon, like, right away. I don't think they were trying very much to hide it though. Like, I don't think it was supposed to be this big secret, right? They made it pretty obvious with her apparel and the way she spoke, how she spoke, you know, how she treated the villagers, how she spoke to Nikki, what she was saying to Nikki. It all felt very intentional. And I liked that, right? Of course, if they were trying to make this a big twist surprise that she was the Long, obviously they would have failed that, but I don't think they were trying to make it this big surprise. I think context that, you know, Miss Vi was Long, I think elevated the narrative because as we spend time with her more and more, and knowing that she's the Long, having that context about this character, when she asks Nikki certain questions or she says something, she states a principle she has, or what she feels about something, it adds, you know, the knowledge that she's Long adds to that. It elevates what she's saying. So I don't think they meant it to be a surprise, but I really like the way they wrote Miss Vi and how they could have just done this like kind of, you know, cold, you know, very stoic figure within the story and not given her a lot of humanizing moments. But they do this, I mean, they do present her as kind of this, not stoic, but she is very reserved, right? She has very specific mannerisms. And this was also something, you know, on the mechanical side, whenever she stands, right, her idle standing position is very particular. You know, she had her hand behind her back, the way she holds her hands, her posture, like this kind of attention to detail is really nice. And it adds to her characterization, right? How we see her standing. Like, imagine if they didn't do that and they just had her in a regular NPC idle stance. Like, she just had her arms at her side. It would lessen the characterization because, you know, having her stand a specific way that's different than any other NPC gives her character. It tells us a little bit about who this person is and how she carries herself. So I really liked that. It's a small detail and a lot of people, you know, don't necessarily single that out. So they're like, oh, she's standing this specific way. That way I can infer X, Y, and Z about her, but it's a subconscious thing. And you don't want your players to notice you're doing this. So again, I think Miss Vi was given a lot of attention in the narrative, and I think it was done in a way that made her very believable as a character. And I was going to mention this earlier too, but the way they humanize her, instead of just having her be this kind of reserved, kind of, you know, stone-faced kind of character, or like super mysterious, you can't really read her. She still is mysterious, but they humanize her when Nikki and her kind of try to investigate what's going on about the disappearances. And they talk to different villagers who are all intertwined, like all of their stories kind of weave together because all the villagers all know each other. And I felt that this was also something that wasn't necessary, like a lesser writing team wouldn't have bothered with this, but the fact that they did take the time to interweave all of the villagers to make them feel like an actual community, everybody knew everybody else. And I know that sounds very self-explanatory, but it's not, right? They chose to make sure that all of these characters have parts in each other's stories, even in minor ways, even if it's just a mention, or they're like, oh, I went to get medicinal herbs from her, or blah, blah, blah. Like, even if it's an offhand line, they still take the time to web together everybody in this village to really strike home the concept of the story, which is community and connection and bonds and things that last, that connection lasts past our mortal lives, right? That generational bonds are the core of society, right? Is like the bigger concept. So even though that sounds like kind of this, it's a concept that seems like something you'd read in a textbook, they did a really good job of making it feel tangible and believable within a narrative, within an emotional story where everybody's connected. And Miss Bai, the way she interacts with the villagers and she listens to, you know, their issues, and we're trying to investigate, and she says comments here and there to Nikki, or how she speaks to the villagers themselves, or how she physically reacts to, you know, one of them I remember specifically was a young woman talking about her mother and how her mother was in the moon watching over her because her mother died of an illness. And it was a very beautiful little side quest. I actually really loved it. But you see how Miss Bai listens to this and takes it in and processes it. So I think they did just a great job on Miss Bai's characterization, and the village as well. The village was almost its own character, and I think they did a good job. The plot itself was kind of slow, but I felt it was still very pleasant. The whole point of it was to, you know, take in this new place. You're admiring the scenery because it's very different from what we've seen in Maryland before. There's this element of mystery going on. And as someone who enjoys world building, right, I was going up to NPCs and talking to them and reading all the little pieces of notes and journals and stuff. Every single word, because I like to get the full context, right? And in my playthrough, I do read that through, you know, with all of us. So when that does eventually get put up, the playthrough itself, we'll go through all of that together. But I liked how the plot allows the player time to really take in what's going on and really introduces us to all the elements of the story and the villagers that are going to be important, and makes Nikki really feel like she's been thrown into a very full, alive place, right? And it's not just these like isolated, because technically it is just like this one village in this painting. And so there was this kind of issue that the developers could have had, where the village is like, oh, it's this like one small little village, and you're like, this isn't believable. But the way in which they've written the villagers and designed the town makes it feel very organic, and you don't really notice that this is the only town on the map and that this community is the only real community here. It's self-contained, but you're so engrossed and immersed in each individual villager's story and how you interact with them that you get pulled in. And that's the point, in my opinion. And I think that was something that was probably a goal for the writers, is to really engage the players in this particular community, to get to know this particular group of people. And I think they succeeded in doing that. They allowed us to luxuriate in exploring and getting to know the village and the customs, right? I know, obviously, Chinese players will not, this is probably not any new information to them, but for a global player, a Western player who has very surface level knowledge of Chinese culture and traditions, it was very fun for me to engage with the culture in this way and really just have fun being presented with all this kind of these new traditions and things. They felt very meaningful and very impactful, so I enjoyed it a lot. I also want to make a comment. I did appreciate that the translation team added these like little asterisks and to help global players or players who maybe don't know, let me say, players who are unfamiliar with Chinese culture and tradition. They added these like cultural references in the dialogue boxes. So when they mentioned like a specific phrase or like an item or something, they kind of said, they have this like a little aside to like what that means in a way that I would understand, because obviously translating traditions and what the meaning is behind a tradition or a cultural item or something like that, I'm not going to know unless I look it up. So I think they kind of went above and beyond to really take care of their player base that are not Chinese or don't have knowledge, of the Chinese culture. So we could also not just follow along with what's happening, but also appreciate the core of the tradition, or the core of the, this cultural ceremony or what have you. And I really appreciated that, because they didn't have to do that. And that would be fair, honestly. That would be fair. But I really liked that I was given the opportunity to truly understand what the impact, the emotional meaning behind this tradition was, or what the ceremony's significance was. So I really liked that. I appreciated that a lot. One thing I do have to say, my own little asterisk, is when we were choosing between the 3 items at the very beginning of the quest, that, Nikki, you eventually get all of them at the very end of the event, but you choose one. I chose the Ronghua, but I didn't know what the item was, because they listed it in the dialogue, the 3 names of the items, and then they had an NPC holding out this tray of these beautiful ornamental handhelds, and I was like, wow, all of these look beautiful, but I didn't know which was which. I didn't know what the names of them were, because I didn't know. It wasn't that big of a deal, and it didn't ruin my experience. I just picked whichever one, and it's not that I'm like, it's like a real complaint, because again, like, it's on me to do research too if I really wanted to know, but that was the only thing that I was like confused. I was like, what? I don't know which is which. So I'm mentioning it because they went out of their way to help non-Chinese players, or anybody who doesn't have knowledge of the Chinese culture. They went out of their way previously to like explain things. So it was a little weird that they didn't at least label them in a way that I could see which one was which. Again, it's not that big of a deal, and it didn't ruin the experience or my understanding of what I was picking, because we learn more about each item in like a couple side quests during the event. So it's not like it ruined my experience, but I did want to mention that, because I remember trying to pick and be like, all of these are beautiful, but I don't know. So I just kind of guessed, just kind of picked whichever. But moving on. So one of the highlights of this event for me as a whole, aside from the narrative, right, was the exploration. The exploration of this region was so refreshing, because we have, not that Wishfield, right, is ugly by any stretch of the imagination. Wishfield is beautiful. I love Wishfield. I love the whimsical elements to Wishfield. It is very Western inspired, but I still, of course, am in love with the whimsy and all of that. So to have DANQING Island and to be able to go into this painting and get kind of this sneak peek of what kind of majesty the Linlong Empire has in terms of the kind of landscape to expect and the building types, like, that was really fun to be able to kind of get this sneak peek at what other nations or regions of Mirrorland will look like. And the Linlong Empire seems to have, again, lots of Chinese cultural influences, obviously. So to see these, like, this kind of whimsical take on Eastern architecture and landscape was amazing. It was great. I enjoyed it so much. So exploring this area, I mean, it was beautiful. It was beautiful, and I had a fun exploring every nook and cranny. Even the painting world, which was a fun way to integrate a different kind of exploration with the new like painting mechanic. I thought that was really cool, and how they had this whole different kind of art style for the painting exploration, the painting within the painting, I guess. So that was neat, and I thought that was a fun little thing, and it was, again, just very refreshing, very engaging. I didn't feel bored at all exploring this area, because again, it's brand new landscape, so it was like different kinds of sights to see, and then the building, the architecture, the NPC outfits too, were just, it all just, the hairstyles, like everything just tied together so well. And I was so immersed exploring this region. Even though it's a very small little island, like, it still was so beautiful. I have nothing but praise for that. I cannot wait to go to the Linlong Empire itself and to see the justice they will do to that nation. So very excited for that in the future, but exploration was for me, spot on. I do have to say though, if you didn't have any of the abilities from the 5 stars, right? So if you didn't have the dragon transportation, or you didn't have I feel like this is more relevant, but the combat ability from the cat 5-star, I can see how maybe the combat would have been a bit of a struggle to some players, because a lot of the enemies are kind of, they're trying to encourage you to pull because they have certain types of enemies, and sometimes they're grouped. There's like a lot of them grouped up in one thing. So if you don't have the 5-star cat outfit and you don't have that combat ability that essentially like slows down time and brings all of them up to you, and you just have to do a couple slashes and you just take care of the whole horde of monsters, of S-lings. If you don't have that, it can be a bit of a, I mean, I know listen, it's not impossible. So it's not like they're like, you have to pull the outfit. It is making it easier. So I guess that's like the only thing I would say for certain players. I could see how they would maybe be a little frustrated that, because combat is part of the exploration mechanics. So I just needed to mention that just to maintain my integrity and be like, they did kind of implement how they formed their combat around the exploration and like how players would interact with groups of enemies. They did make it a bit they did encourage you to you kind of want to pull to have that new combat ability, because it does make fighting the enemies a lot easier. But that's all I have to say on that. I just had to mention it because I couldn't leave it out, because it is part of exploring. The next thing I want to talk about is the music of this region specifically and throughout the quests. Beautiful, stunning, no notes, 10 out of 10. Not that the music has been bad previously. I think the music actually in this game is very good. I have so many playlists from the different regions of Wishfield, and now I have Danqing Island music. Like, it's just so good. It's so good. And it was cool to have the music emulate, the culture of this region, i.e., they had traditional Chinese instruments and instrumentation, and the type of music we were listening to, not just the instruments themselves, but the actual score was heavily inspired by traditional Chinese music, and it was great. Beautiful, stunning. Like I said, 10 out of 10, no notes. Did so much work to help immerse me too when I was exploring, listening to the idle exploration tracks. It was just, God, it added to the freshness. I don't know, fresh is like literally the only word I can think of. It's just so fresh. I feel like I could breathe in the wind and smell the flowers and the trees, and I was like, it was just very immersive experience for me. And I just, the music added to that immersion, and the music used during the performances too, when Miss Bai performs her umbrella, the umbrella show, and in other parts, like during the cutscenes where there was music, and music was also heavily involved in the boss fight as well. It was just great. It was great and absolutely beautiful. Speaking of cutscenes, this is the last bit I'm going to talk about in the strengths, and then we'll hop into discussing the weaknesses. The cutscenes were really well done, I think. The Nikki cat outfit was very integral to the plot of the story. Like, so they used the outfit in the story instead of just having this like mini little outfit cutscene ad. There was okay, to be fair though, the cat outfit was integrated well, but the other dragon outfit wasn't. The dragon outfit did have like the little outfit ad. They kind of regressed a little bit. Again, the cat outfit was used very well. It was integral to the story. It had a lot of meaning, but the dragon outfit, as beautiful as it is, because I pulled both outfits, I couldn't help myself. Okay. So I'm not trying to be hypocritical here, but I'm trying to be honest. The way that the dragon outfit was presented was kind of a bit of an ad. But I have to at least give them credit where it's due, that they did do the work to integrate the cat outfit into the story, so it was tied to something. It meant something to Nikki, and it meant something to the players, and it meant something to the lore. All those boxes were checked for the cat outfit, but unfortunately the dragon outfit did not receive that same kind of treatment in the story, so that was unfortunate. But I did like the cutscenes, and I liked how the cat outfit was integrated into the story. All right, so weaknesses. I'm gonna go back to the pin I put in the topic regarding Nikki and the different timelines at the very beginning of this video and at the beginning of the event quests themselves. Nikki essentially, quote unquote, lies about being artist Nikki, even though at the end of the quest we know it was her. It was just her from a different timeline. So it's not that she was embodying or trying to impersonate someone that, a complete stranger. But at the beginning, Nikki does think that, right? She does think that she's impersonating kind of this complete stranger. And I think that the quest doesn't really hold Nikki accountable for this in as much as it should. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So Nikki essentially lies about knowing these people, even though she recognizes a lot of the cultures and the customs, which is believable and fine. I don't understand how the plot just kind of lets Nikki get away with this, that she essentially lies, which is not inherently a problem. Obviously, she's trying to just kind of understand why she's here and who these people are and how are these people living in this painting, right? So I'm not saying it's bad that she was lying, but she didn't know who this previous artist that they were talking about was, right? They didn't really know. She doesn't know who this person was, and she certainly didn't know it was her, right, from another timeline at first. So I think that there should have been, maybe Momo could have done this for the plot, but Momo could have been the mouthpiece, whatever Nikki, because Nikki didn't just like go along. She didn't just go with the flow. A lot of the responses you can give are Nikki like completely fabricating or quote unquote remembering entire interactions with these villagers. And again, I understand at the end, once she remembers, she knows that this was her from a different timeline. I understand that, but at the beginning, she doesn't know that. And so when she just kind of talks about these interactions with these NPCs, I was kind of like, wow, she's really playing into the lying here, right? She's like, and again, that wouldn't necessarily be an issue, but no one questioned, like Momo didn't question this. He's like, why are you, you're making up a lot of stories about these people. Like, we don't know them. And, we don't know them. We don't know if we're going to get caught out, right? If these people are going to recognize, well, I don't remember you having that interaction with me or blah, 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 right? This kind of doesn't happen. And so again, the plot just lets Nikki get away with this. And again, I understand at the end, she does remember, but at the beginning she doesn't. And if they wanted to do a thing where she's kind of subconsciously remembering already, and that's where these stories are coming from, like when she's talking to people and she's like, oh yeah, I did this and this with you or that with you, maybe she, after the conversation happens, she can turn to Momo and go, I don't know why I said that, or maybe I feel like this is familiar or something like that, right? To establish that she doesn't really know why she said that or where this detailed quote unquote lie came from about her experience with these people, because she's never met them before, to her knowledge at the beginning of the quest. So I feel like this was kind of a little bit of a weakness in the plot and a little bit of a lack of consistency, that even though, it checks out by the end, at the beginning it doesn't. And that's a bit of a plot hole. So again, not super unforgivable, it's not that bad, but it does raise a lot of questions that were kind of left unanswered. So if I was to kind of go through this with a more critical eye, a more literary, analytical eye, I would probably tighten up that beginning quest and just give her a couple lines with Momo that establishes why she's saying these elaborate quote unquote memories / lies. At the time, that's what we think she's doing, right? Like, have some sort of introspection, either through Momo, her talking to Momo, or her just saying it out loud, monologuing, whatever, about why she's saying that or why she thinks this, or are these memories, where's this coming from, right? Where's this knowledge coming from? So that's my one, I think, biggest gripe. Again, it's not that bad, but it is there and I noticed it. The next thing I wanted to talk about is that I wish we got a little bit more about the previous Nikki. And I know I'm putting this in the weakness category, but because I understand that they're going to be drip feeding us information about maybe the previous Nikki from the we'll call it the failed timeline where the world did get destroyed, right? according to the retcon. I would like to have learned more about the previous Nikki in relation to Miss Bai, in relation to what, you know, I mean, we learn a lot about her relationship with Miss Bai, but I'm saying in general, maybe who these people were they inspired by real people she knew or not? We do say that, you know, the concept of the whole painting world, right, is that the world essentially reincarnates itself into something real, right? She starts off this painting world very basic with her whim. She creates this painting and she essentially gives life through her paint and the ink to these creatures. They start off as creatures and they, you know, then as the villagers become essentially more sentient, we'll say, then the world develops and grows based off of the overlapping connections and sentience that the villagers have with each other, and the development of Long and the reincarnation cycle. Very interesting stuff, by the way. That's not a weakness, but I'm mentioning this because it would have been nice to maybe get a little more about how previous Nikki even came to understand that this was a thing, that this could happen, that the world could develop on its own this way, because it seems like something she had already learned, right? Or something that maybe existed in Mirrorland and she just copied it into this painting. Or did she just discover this thing? Like, we don't really know, and maybe we're not supposed to really know. Maybe that's part of the mystery of it, but I like to know everything, especially if it gives context to maybe the Linlong Empire, which is what this painting is based off of and where we assume Nikki was when she created this painting, right? So I think it would have been interesting to maybe get a little more on the previous Nikki. Again, I don't think it's like that much of weakness, because I understand they're trying to drip feed us information, big lore drops like this over, you know, long periods of time. So I don't know if it's like technically a weakness, but I personally would have liked to see a little more about the previous Nikki. This goes hand in hand with what I was just saying, but I would have also liked a little bit more info about this like reincarnation cycle. Not that I don't understand how it functions within this Dancing Island, right, within the painting, but how does this concept apply to Mirrorland as a whole? Is this something Nikki learned how to do? Is this something that a process that existed maybe in a larger, more universal scale within the Linlong Empire or within Mirrorland, or beyond? Like, I think it would have been cool to maybe learn more about that. Again, I know they're just hinting at these elevated concepts of the world, and I wasn't expecting a full, you know, rundown, annotated 10-page essay on the world building concepts of the Linlong Empire or Mirrorland or whatever. So I wasn't expecting that, but I think it would have been nice if maybe we got maybe a couple more journal entries about it or something, or I don't know. It was literally so fascinating learning about it and how everything kind of tied together, and how the concepts of community, of bonds over time ties into this idea of reincarnation, and the fact that sentient life can develop from whim, right? From creativity, from the desperate hope of a stylist, in this case Nikki, who is of course very powerful, and also we have to assume the previous Nikki had the heart of infinity with her. I know in that timeline it gets corrupted and everything goes to shit, right? We don't know the details, but that's what happens. But the previous Nikki obviously had a lot of power, and so her ability to create this painting world in a desperate hope to preserve the beauty that was lost and have it essentially grow within itself like a little, you know, aquarium of life is really fascinating. Like, it's such a cool concept. And so I wish that there was maybe more for us to opine about or to learn about it some more, and maybe the relationship, that concept or that universal mechanic, for lack of a better term, how that applies to the wider Mirrorland or maybe the universe, right? Even outside of Mirrorland. Because the retcon violently introduced the wider universe to the player base. You know my thoughts on the retcon. If you don't, I have an entire video talking about that, so you can check that out if you want. But anywho, that wraps up my thoughts on the weaknesses. Now, update stuff as a whole, I have a couple things to say. This is going to be pretty short, but I need to say that I did think that there was, not that this is unique to this update, this is kind of an overall issue with a lot of the seasons of Infinity Nikki, is that there's lots of FOMO present in the update. And I know it's a gacha title. I understand that there is an element of FOMO that is just inescapable because it's just the genre of game, right? It's just how gachas work. It's how gachas function. But I feel that the game really, really leans in to FOMO and really tries to demand a lot of money from their players to engage in the game in a reasonable manner, right? I understand, yes, whales should be rewarded within the game, within their assets in the game. They're choosing to spend lots of money. They should be getting something equal in return, right? I understand that. And everybody, I think, does, you know, even if you're not a whale, I think everyone understands that concept. But, you know, average players who maybe some people spend a little bit, but most are probably free to play. Like, a lot of these players don't, you know, can't interact with a lot of the fun stuff in the game because this game is all about cosmetics, right? That's the whole point, is that yes, there is some gameplay tied to the outfits, right, that can be convenient and whatever, but the cosmetic attire is the whole ground of a dress-up game, right? It's the whole point. And so when you lock behind a paywall, an actual paywall, not like, oh, people maybe save their diamonds and can pay for these fun things each season with their diamonds. No, a lot of this is behind actual paywalls. So you have to either pay with with actual money, or you have to buy the stellarites or whatever they're called. The real money currency in game you have to purchase in order to buy the items. And I just, again, this was a problem in the previous season, so this isn't like new, this is not new criticism, but I just really don't like this. And it's okay if it's some things, some items, maybe premium cosmetics, I understand, but baseline stuff, I just feel is on top of running 2 5-star outfits at the same time. Like, it's just a lot to ask of your player base, right? And free-to-play players, I mean, what the hell are they going to do? They have to skip essentially everything and have to only, you know, they can't get any, you know, barely any of the fun extra seasonal cosmetics that are limited time to this event. They can't engage with any of that content because it's all locked for them. And they're expected to have to deal with like multiple 5-star outfits. Like, to me, that's just, it's unfair. I think that there is a balance between the game dictating, hey, this is premium cosmetic stuff, this is only for people who are willing to pay for it. Okay, but having most of the content be locked behind paywall isn't fair. I don't think it's a proper balance. I really don't. And having, again, it'd be one thing if they had, you know, some premium content locked behind paywall, but they had a lot of accessibility for free-to-play players or low spenders to save and be able to afford to get most banner outfits, then we'd have a different discussion. I would be a little less harsh on the paywall stuff, but because they demand so much of players each banner, you know, people it's just unfortunate, right? It's just unfortunate. And I think the greed from the company is something that a lot of people, it leaves a lot of sour tastes in people's mouths. And as much as I praise and appreciate them, the devs, I should say, writing, trying to improve the writing, trying to improve the actual narrative, emotional experience, I think there is a lot to be improved still on the content side of it, in terms of the purchasable stuff and the stuff that you can actually gacha for. So I as much praise as I have for the environment, and you know, people can support the game in whatever means that they're comfortable with, but I felt that I wouldn't be sincere to myself. I wouldn't have integrity as a content creator if I didn't mention this and speak about it while also praising this update for the most part. So do I think that the overall narrative is heading in a good direction? Yes. Do I want to see more of this kind of emotionally character-driven narratives in the events? Yes. I have not played any 1.9 stuff yet. I will have a review of that up as well as fast as I can. But so I hope that some of these things are improved upon in this next update. But from the conversations I've seen on Infinity Nikki Twitter about the housing system, like, again, I'll get into all that in that review, but I don't know, you know, I think we're going to still have a lot of the same criticisms in this section of the review video for 1.9. That's all I'm going to say. So anyways, thank you so much if you're listening to the end of this. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. It means a lot. Please leave your comments below on what you felt about the narrative, which if you had a favorite character, if you maybe felt, you know, you've picked up on the same plot weaknesses that I did, or if you have the same kind of criticisms I do for the you know, the content and the gacha and the FOMO that is present in this game, and not just this season, but this game as a whole. It's pretty intense. So would love to hear your thoughts down below. Please let me know. Again, I'm so sorry that this is so late, but life has gotten in the way, as it always does. So I hope that despite this being late, I was still able to offer and provide some pretty decent analytical kind of look at the narrative of this past event, and a little bit of my thoughts, my personal thoughts too. So thank you so much. If I don't see you live, then I will see you in the next one.